Hello. Hey, Bo. Hey, Wade. How are you both
Hello.
doing today?
Good. Yeah,
I'm
things
doing
not
well
so good.
also. It
Yeah.
rained in Southern California, so that was
Mhm.
nice to wake up to.
Yeah, nice, nice. Well, thank you so much to the both of you for being here today. Really excited to speak with you. So I wanted to kind of start with just kind of like looking back in the last roughly 12 months or so, and last summer, following the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I mean, many in the tech industry kind of and media and just really everywhere kind of started speaking out a lot about Black Lives Matter and speaking more about diversity and inclusion in their respective industries. And I guess this will go to you, Wade, but I'm curious, what was that like for you, kind of finally seeing, kind of seeing like, oh, like now all of a sudden it kind of feels like all these people are on board. Like, what was that like for you, just as like in your role?
Yeah, I would say, I was in one space. I was happy, right, that the cameras are bringing more people in, but I was also somewhat frustrated that it takes something like that for folks to get truly engaged. And inside of Netflix, one of the things that I was really intentional about is to tell our employees who are not Black, right, to not ask our employees how they feel, right, but for them to be much more introspective of what it felt like for them, right, as a white person or however they identify, for them to do the introspection, right, because like that's what it means to be an ally, to not put the labor on the group that is already feeling the impact and the oppression. And what we found was that many of our employees, for the first time, had to wrestle with like what it means to be white, what it means to be in a situation where you are seeing someone who looks like you take the life of someone who looks like me. So we really tried to switch the actual narrative and the conversation to not add more labor and trauma on our Black employees.
For sure. Yeah, and Bo, I'm curious what that was like for you in your role, just as someone who's been speaking about diversity and inclusion in tech and just in society for so long.
I'm sorry, Megan, you were slightly muted on mine. Can you just repeat that
Oh,
question
yeah,
again?
yeah, no worries. Yeah, I was just kind of curious what just kind of the events of last summer were like for you as someone
Mm,
who's been in this role, in these types of roles for many years, to kind of
yeah,
suddenly have this global attention on these issues.
absolutely. So, I think my first thought was, I have to admit, I was a little bit skeptical about the rush of everybody coming on board and suddenly wanting to make really profound statements, because it's not as though we haven't seen this before. We haven't, there have been so many other instances of people being horrified and shocked by the, violent murder of an African American person by somebody within the criminal justice system. And then within a few weeks, you see that interest and that focus again wane once more. So I was skeptical that the enthusiasm would continue, and I mean enthusiasm in a way like to like try to solve all of like our racism problems in a short period of time. I was surprised that it did continue. But one of the things that particularly I was really wanted to make sure is, in the effort to truly show support, I didn't want, certainly Uber, but I didn't want any company or any person to make such a wide commitment that ultimately those commitments became nothing more than virtue signaling at the end of the day. So that was something that, in much the same way that, Wade talked about his experience where he was messaging, don't look to all the Black people to like pour out their hearts and souls and like share and educate. My approach was, we did very similar messaging, but also, I said to my leadership, if you really want to come out and make some bold statements about being anti-racist, I'm going to create almost a litmus test to make sure that you really understand what that means. Because I don't want to go out as a company to say, we're going to be anti-racist and then do nothing about it, because that's just, that just relives and rehashes the injustices that we've seen in the past. So if my leadership, if Adara and the ELT wanted to say, we're going to be anti-racist, I said, this is what anti-racism literally looks like. Is this what you're signing up on? And they said yes. And so for me, I was probably the most conservative if I'm being completely honest, of my leadership, I was the most conservative in terms of what I thought we should be doing, only because I've lived through this cycle so many times before. It actually took my leadership to say, Bo, we're really on board with this. Now support us as we go. And then, of course, we as a company came out a little bit later in the summer with our commitments that we've made, and I'm really proud of how we have lived those. I think in part because we took a bit more time to make sure that we understood what it meant for us to become an anti-racist company.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about this when Uber came out with its most recent diversity report, but just how the optics weren't great of coming out and saying like, okay, like we're an anti-racist company, but then next diversity report showing a decline in Black representation. And I mean, I know that you said that you were definitely not happy about how that all played out, and so I'm kind of curious, like how do you kind of like come back from that, and like what is Uber doing now to try to get back to where it was in terms of Black representation, and then even like surpass that?
Right, and I think part of like the commitments we made around being really anti-racist is transparency at all costs, even when we know that transparency could potentially make us not reflect as positively on us. So the question did go back is, when we were putting together our diversity report is, wow, these numbers are not where we want them to be. None of us are happy about it. But in our commitment of being accountable, we want the public to hold us accountable. We want people to hold accountable. We want to be accountable to our workforce. We're going to be as transparent about why that decline in Black employees happened and underrepresented people happened, what the cause was, and what we are doing. And so one of the things that came out of our anti-racism commitments is we now have a racial equity leadership committee. It includes some of our senior-most leaders, including Nelson Chai, Nikki, a head of talent acquisition. There's about 20 plus leaders across the organization. Every single one of our commitments now have an executive sponsor who's driving it. We have metrics and KPIs that we're holding ourselves to, and specifically around representation. We've done in 2019, we expanded our accountability and linking, performance for our executive leadership team to set goals that we've publicly announced. We're actually expanding that this year. So we now have our 50 top leaders who all have operational targets around representation in our org. And we're working with them right now so that they understand how do we make these changes possible. It is a matter of hiring, but it actually in many ways for Uber, it is more about a matter of increasing retention, development, promotion as well. So we've expanded our accountability even further. So that's just one way that we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to get that representation and get that inclusion into the company.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, and Wade, I mean, so Netflix is really at this intersection of the media industry and the technology industry, and like both industries have, kind of have, they're separate but also like very, very similar diversity and inclusion issues. So I'm curious about how you kind of navigate that in your role at Netflix.
Yeah, so we truly see ourselves as an entertainment company who has its roots in technology, right? And I think that in some ways can give us a competitive advantage, right? To be thinking through like helping everyone on our content side understand the value of representation in front of the camera, behind the camera, in the writer's room, right? And then on the tech side, like the importance of having folks who sit at different intersections who do our algorithms, who our data scientists are, like the fact that if we are doing our job, then we can have the type of content and the engagement with our products and services that meet the needs of everyone, which increases a customer joy, right? So if we can get really good at that from a representation standpoint, and to Bo's point, be as transparent and as consistent, right, as possible. And one of our other big things is like, are we making the right investment so that we're not just signaling that Netflix cares? So for our Black Bank initiative of $100 million, that didn't come from our executives. That came from our Black employees, specifically Aaron Mitchell, who said, hey, like if we want to really end the wealth gap, or as Ta-Nehisi Coates calls it, the injury gap, we actually have to trust and believe that when you put the hands in Black and brown folks, right, like that gives them agency and they will make the smartest decisions. So we're just really trying to be super thoughtful and sit at that intersection. But to Bo's point, the representation that's at the senior level and even at the IC level is truly how you make that culture change happen for external folks and for internal folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm curious, in general, in general with your, just with your role at Netflix, like how do you see the company's role or like the corporate responsibility aspect in terms of advancing D&I, whether that's like representation on screen or representation within the company?
I think all of it is our responsibility, right? Because if we're trying to entertain the world, we've got to have folks internally who can actually make sure that becomes true, right? So we can't have a UCAN perspective who is building out all of our products and services and content for our APAC folks or for our EMEA folks. So how are we truly becoming global? But to make sure that the folks who are guiding our missions and our services and the innovation are truly global in nature as well. Otherwise, we're just really promoting Western ideas and Western values. And that is not how you ensure that the entire world is entertained.
So I want to talk goals for a little bit, and so Bo, I know Uber has made some public commitments, and you kind of touched on those in the anti-racism commitments. But what are the current goals that Uber has around representation and inclusion?
Yeah. So as we talked about in our 2019 Diversity and Inclusion Report, the commitment that we made was a 3-year goal to get our representation of women at the manager level and above to 35%, and to get our representation of our underrepresented people of color, so primarily Black and Latinx, to from the what we call L4, but it's really like a junior manager role, kind of assistant manager role. We want to get that to 14%. So those are the specific goals that we've made public. And then from there, we look at how do we actually, what does that actually look like? Like, how do we have to build the pipeline to get there? How do we have to, what does the retention have to look like? What does the promotion rates have to look like for us to get there? And then that dilutes down to further in the organization. So those are our 2 goals, but it really, we try to do a very data informed approach to diversity and inclusion, because within the tech sector, and Wade knows this, and people need the data. People need to know, like, have that specificity of what it is that I'm trying to achieve. But of course, it's not just about the data. We do as much culture work and process work and systems change work in order to support it, because you can't simply rely on representation. The representation is a byproduct of the fact that you got the culture and the processes right. It's not the end goal in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, I know that previously you've kind of talked about providing opportunities for, we're essentially creating a pipeline for drivers and delivery workers at Uber to get jobs at the company. I was wondering if you can kind of like update me as to where things are with that initiative.
Absolutely. So we continue, like for the last several years, we have always looked to find ways that we can bring people from within our larger ecosystem to into the organization, because who else has a better understanding of the business itself than our couriers, our driver partners? So every year we actually monitor and track how many people from that courier and driver partner world we have. And in the past, we've hired thousands, and we continue to have that focus. A lot of them go into our customer service organizations because they understand that customer service organization very well. We have actually, though, we have examples of driver partners who have moved into our marketing, our people, our operations organization as well. And one of the programs that I'm really proud of, it's right now just a tiny little trickle, but 2 years ago, we started working with a boot camp that focuses on underserved communities called Pursuit, a boot camp that actually trains people to become computer, software engineers, coders themselves. And we launched a class a couple of years ago. We actually now have 3 full-time engineers in our Eats organization who were previously either couriers or drivers. And we've now launched the second class with Pursuit this year. It's our pilot of saying, we know that ability and capability is everywhere, but opportunity is what is very unequitably distributed. And so it's our way of saying, if we can find within these communities and give them those opportunities, can they be successful? And I think we have a small set of success, and we're hoping that eventually over time we can take these programs and expand them. We also launched recently a program called CST in Motion, and CST in Motion looks at actually our hourly wage full-time employees who work in customer service and trying to accelerate them to move into other parts of our organization, like our operations, like our marketing, like our sales orgs as well. So that's something that we've strategically created, and that's a byproduct of our racial equity commitments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually just saw a question come in from the audience that's relevant to what you were just talking about. And so this is from someone named Lusic. So yeah, it's question for you, Bo. Is your board responsible for any of those metrics, and in what way? And then if the company is not meeting its anti-racist commitment, what is the board's responsibility?
Yep. So the board is holding us accountable. So I'm really proud of actually the board that we have. We have an incredibly diverse board. We have, out of 10 board members, we have 4 women. We have several people of color as well. It's actually one of the most diverse boards that I've ever had to serve to. I report data to the boards and progress on a quarterly basis with our board. I've met with them a couple of times now to really walk them through what we do. And if we miss our goals, like there will be an accountability, like the board will hold our executive leadership team accountable. They make decisions, the board makes direct decisions on, our compensation for our leadership team. And if they don't meet those goals that we've set forth, like there will be consequences. And so the board is very actively involved. As everyone knows, Ursula Burns is one of our members, and she certainly is one, but not the only member of our board who pushes us every single day to move forward. So I'm really proud of the board I get to work with. And, every single quarter, D&I is one of the top things that they care about, and they really want us to make the progress and fulfill the commitments we made.
Nice. Yeah. And Wade, so over at Netflix, like what are the goals that the company has in place around diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. So, unlike, Uber, we're very nascent in our inclusion journey, right? So myself, Renee Myers, and the rest of our team have only been, in place for 3 years now. So we're still at the awareness building phase, like from a foundational standpoint. And we're really trying to double down so that folks know why IND matters, like what it actually is, and how it impacts all of us, right? Because oftentimes folks think of all of these isms and phobias as something that happens to other people. But if we can really make folks understand that there's a cost to all these isms and phobias to all of us individually, interpersonally, culturally, and institutionally, then it makes it easier down the road when folks start to feel somewhat fatigued, right? Because there is always that fatigue factor. So we're really trying to get ahead of that and to have folks to think through, like, what is in it for me and what is in it for my colleagues, right? And I would say our other largest goal is to make sure that all of our leaders can speak to the importance of IND more than just a talking point, right? So how do we build a model that's a train the trainer model where each of our leaders has a one-to-one inclusion coach, right? Which requires them to have monthly sit downs with their inclusion partner where they go on a real intensive journey so that they can understand how does their leadership style need to evolve and adapt and expand and flex to meet the needs of a larger set of individuals and not the historical ones who folks have engaged with. And we found that that to put our leaders on the spot so that when someone calls me to give a talk, I can actually say, no, our COO, Greg Peters, is just as competent and capable to sit on this panel about inclusion as I am. And we feel like that we're now modeling and signaling to our entire organization that this is not just a nice to have, but it's part and parcel to your success as an employee, as a leader, and to our success as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that is that oftentimes happens in D&I is that, like you have like a company has a D&I department, but then all of that work just like solely falls on those individuals. And like, sometimes it's two people, sometimes it's like a group of three people. And I mean, even at TC, I mean, like we actually last year started actually, okay. And other than just having this like small group of people kind of being responsible for inclusion, like we're going to have this be an all hands meeting every time we're talking about our own initiatives. And I just think that's important. So it's cool that Netflix is doing that. And
can I here and just comment on something that Wade said? So Wade kind of described the journey that Netflix is on, is that it's more in the nascent early stages. But I'll tell you, Wade, the decision that Netflix made to make those commitments into Black banks and redirect some of your investments, that had a material impact in the industry. Like so many companies followed suit. And I think this is the thing that is really different about the field of diversity and inclusion and the work that we're all doing, is that though tech companies may think of themselves as competitors for talent and so forth, in the D&I space, we're all kind of in this together, because when one company, even if the company believes itself to be kind of on the early side of the journey, they can have a material impact on what everybody else does. Like that investment into Black banks changed the way everybody thought about investments. Just the same way when Uber made its changes around forced arbitration for gender-based, claims of harassment on a platform internally. I think we were the first company to do that, and then every other company followed suit. So, this is why it's so important for all of us to push each other forward, because if there's something that we're doing at Uber, from a systemic perspective, I want to share that with everybody else, because I want everybody else to be able to make the same progress, because we're all in the same ecosystem. So just praise to Netflix for some of this work you've done, because even though you're early on, it had an impact.
Thank you. And Bo knows that she has been a mentor of mine for many months. And as we were rolling out our remote work, the first person who I reached out to was you, Bo. So you have just been a stalwart and an innovator in this industry and in this sector for so long. So I'm just appreciative to stand back and watch and learn and to ask questions that you have taught us all. And, transparently, your ability to take risk in this space, right? Specifically a space that has been so heavily male and white. So I'm just grateful. So thank you also.
Yeah, and quick thing. So Lusik from the audience actually wanted to clarify the question, saying that they were wanting to know how this is for you, but they're wanting to know how Uber's board itself is held accountable for anti-racism commitments, I believe is the question.
So I think the board itself, our board, I can't speak to any other board that's out there, but certainly given the amount of attention that Uber gets on this topic on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, I don't think that there's a company out there where every move we make from a D&I perspective is scrutinized. I think the accountability really for the board is, if we're not making progress, people will ask these types of questions, these exact kinds of questions, right? So it's not as though our board, unlike our ELT, our board isn't compensated like an employee or anything like that. There's no performance bonus that would really interfere with fiduciary responsibility to shareholders if they had some kind of real significant gain from it. I think a lot of it is, are they being a responsible board by ensuring that Uber never loses focus? They know that we're going to get questions like this all the time. So, I'm not concerned about them holding themselves accountable, because goodness knows if you were on fly on the wall in the conversations I have with them, that they take this very seriously, and that in turn results in the bold moves that we have taken as a company. As I said, when we were making our racial equity commitments back in July, I was the most conservative in the room. I was the one going, I don't know if I'm comfortable making that commitment. And the company was like, no, we will hold ourselves accountable. Because to Wade's point, and to the point you were making, Megan, I was like, oh my goodness, am I comfortable making these commitments? Because who will it fall on? But the company was like, no, it falls on us both. That's why we're willing to make them, because I'm not looking to you and your team, your small team, to do it. I'm looking for all of us. Now your role is to just ensure that we make progress, and that you're the role. Don't, this isn't virtue signaling. This is real. What is the real change going to look like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so we have another question from the audience from Chris Misner. This is for you, Bo. He's wondering, How does Uber reconcile its commitment to anti-racism with its Prop 22 work, which disproportionately hurts people of color?
So actually, I would challenge some of that belief that Prop 22 actually disproportionately hurts people of color. If you actually look at the way the civil rights organizations that came out in support of Prop 22, the NAACP of Northern California and Hawaii came out in support of Prop 22, most of the Hispanic civil rights organizations as well. And that was that support that we got from the civil rights organizations really came from the fact that when you look at AB 5, which is, Prop 22 was in response to AB 5, and you looked at the way exceptions were being made to AB 5, you saw that the exceptions were disproportionately being made for those IC independent, contractor roles that were predominantly represented by white workers. And they were all getting exceptions from AB 5. And then you looked at the roles that were predominantly represented by people of color, especially underrepresented people of color, and those roles were not getting exceptions in AB 5. For me, how I define racism isn't based on intent, but based on impact. And when I see that kind of level of disproportionate impact, that's when I think about, what is racist or not. So I would say, I would challenge this notion that AB 5 was actually disproportionately hurt people of color, especially given that, we had civil rights organizations that said, we support Prop 22. So that's kind of, I don't think there's anything that really needs to be reconciled from my perspective and from the organization's perspective.
Yeah.
And just one quick add, like to Bo's point, there have been other propositions, specifically the LGBT one that happened in California that folks framed as something that was, let's say, Black sponsored, right? But we found out when all of the data came out that it actually wasn't something that was sponsored by Black folks, that it was actually those progressives and those liberals who voted for us. So I think to Bo's point, that we have to dig much, much deeper and listen to the individual communities that are impacted by it, and not just to make assumptions.
Yeah, and I mean, we're definitely out of time, but I guess just one last thing. I guess I will just point to so Uber came out with a survey. I think it was either earlier this week or late last week, just asking drivers about their experiences working on the platform, and I think it was about 27% of workers said that they're dissatisfied with their experience on Uber, which is it's 20%. It's not everyone. It's not a majority. But I guess the question is, like, how will Uber go about helping to ensure that even more people are having a positive experience on the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and you're right. Like the majority of our driver partners want to stay as independent contractors, right? But what they're looking for in the conversations we've always had with them is, how do we maintain the flexibility that they're looking for? That's what the majority of our driver partners love about working on our platforms is, and being on the platforms is that flexibility and that independence they get. But can we offer some safeguards? And you've seen Dara, he's written op-eds about this, is like, we want to be, and that was the whole purpose of Prop 22, is to be able to redefine what it means to be an independent contractor. We're working in the 21st century using laws that were like created 100 years ago about what it meant to be a contractor. Things are changing, and we want to be able to change that. But in some instances, we can't in certain jurisdictions based on how they define what an independent contractor is. So that's why we are trying to change things. So maintain the flexibility, maintain that independence that our partners love, and then offer some additional security that is there as well, that where we can.
Got it. Well, yeah, we are out of time, unfortunately. But Wade, Bo, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate getting to hear both of your insights.
Have a great day. It's good to see you again, Bo.
Thank you. Yeah, same here.